Thank you for coming to this press conference for the United Nations Fact-Finding Mission on the Gaza Conflict. This morning, Justice Goldstone presented the mission report to the Human Rights Council, and we heard from 29 states during the interactive discussions, in addition to the concerned parties, Israel and Palestine. This afternoon, we'll hear from an additional 8 states, after which we will hear from some NGOs, and then the mission members will have the opportunity to make some concluding remarks. By now, I'm sure you all know the members of the mission, but I will introduce them very briefly. The head of the mission, of course, is Justice Goldstone, former member of the South African Constitutional Court and former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. The other mission members are Hina Jilani, who is an advocate of the Supreme Court of Pakistan and former special representative of the Secretary General on Human Rights Defenders. She was a member of the International Commission of Inquiry on Darfur in 2004. Professor Christine Chinkin is a professor of international law at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and she was a member of the high-level fact-finding mission to Beit Hanoun in 2008. And on the left is Colonel Desmond Travers, who is a former officer in the Irish Armed Forces and member of the Board of Directors of the Institute for International Criminal Investigations. They will be available to answer your questions about the fact-finding mission and its findings and recommendations. Unfortunately, once again, time is very short, and as we will have to get back to the afternoon session of the Council very quickly after the press conference, there will not be any opportunity for one-on-one interviews. And now I'd like to hand the floor over to Justice Goldstone.
So thank you very much. I'd like to add my warm welcome to you all on behalf of the whole mission. I assume that you've all had the press release that was issued this morning. You've all had the report, so I'm not going to waste any time by making any opening statements, and I think we should go straight into the questions that I encourage you to ask. If you wish to direct any questions to other members of the mission, please indicate.
Thank you very much, Andreas Zumach, correspondent for Berlin newspaper Die Tageszeitung. Mr. Goldstone, the Israeli government has rejected your work on 3 grounds. First, that the mandate is flawed and biased. Second, that at least parts of the content of your report... Sorry, could you? I didn't realize. Could you repeat that? Yes, sir. The Israeli government has.
Just 1 second.
Technology.
If you press it, yeah.
So let's try again.
Yes, Andreas Zumach, Die Tageszeitung, Berlin. The Israeli government has rejected your report on 3 grounds. Number 1, that the mandate is flawed and one-sided. Number 2, that at least parts of the report are biased against Israel. And number 3, that at least one member, specifically Madame Chinkin, is biased because she made a statement not on human rights issues, but on the legality of the war at an earlier stage. Could you please comment on all 3 of these charges? And secondly, and very briefly, do we have any indications that Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will take up your recommendation and to submit this report to Security Council according to Charter Article 99?
Well, thank you for the questions. Firstly, as far as the mandate is concerned, I think it was made very clear by me in this very same room when my appointment was announced that the mandate I accepted was an even-handed mandate, and I hope the report demonstrates that. We've dealt with all violations of international law relevant to the context of the military operations of December 2008 and January 2009. And I was happy that the overwhelming number of countries who spoke at the meeting this morning, at the session of the Human Rights Council, recognized the fact that the that there was an even-handed mandate, that was taken seriously. The question of bias is really, I think, must now be demonstrated by the report. If the report demonstrates bias, well, so be it. I think it's a little bit irrelevant at this stage to judge the report by what I would suggest are very flimsy allegations of bias against any members of the commission, of the mission. I've dealt really on so many occasions with the allegations against Professor Chinkin. I'm surprised it comes up again. I've made it very clear, as she has, that the letter she signed, and that's what it's based on, a letter that was published in the London Times, signed by most of the leading international humanitarian lawyers in the United Kingdom, talked about the legality of the military operations themselves, and didn't comment on the manner in which they were executed. Our mission was not called upon to deal with the legality of the war at all. We were dealing with humanitarian law and human rights law, and we dealt with primarily with the manner in which the operations on both sides were carried out and the extent to which they were in violation. So it seems to me, with all the emphasis I can place on it, that the allegations of bias against any of the members, and Professor Chinkin in particular, are really straws on which I think some people are clutching to dismiss a very serious report. As far as the Secretary General is concerned, I have nothing. I know nothing at all, and my understanding is that he will only become seized of the matter if the Human Rights Council accepts the recommendations and refers the matter to him. But I would add that up to date, that certainly the Secretary General has been very warm in his support and encouragement for the mission.
Frank Jordan's The Associated Press. I would like to ask whether you're surprised that the United States has described your report as deeply flawed, and also I'd be grateful if you could address one of the complaints about the report, which is that there were, during your visit in Gaza, there was a visible presence of Hamas security in the vicinity of your sort of mission. Did that in any way inhibit the testimony that you received while in Gaza?
Well, obviously it's disappointing that the United States has found the report to be deeply flawed. It's difficult to deal with the allegation because we've received absolutely no detail at all. The first I've heard of that was some oblique statements to that effect earlier in the day by other members of the United States administration, and it's something I'd be happy to deal with if we get detail on which that statement is based. Let me say, I think we were all encouraged by the fact that the United States, in effect, has accepted and supports the major recommendation of the mission, and that is it's called for acceptable investigations of the allegations by both sides, and I think that's important support for that recommendation. As far as the second question is concerned, again, it's a question that's arisen on a number of occasions, and I have, on every occasion possible, categorically denied what is, I think, a mischievous allegation based on no factual evidence at all, and it's completely incorrect. At no time during our visits to Gaza, and we spent 9 days there, at no time did any of us see, or was any of us, or were any of us aware of any presence of Hamas officials, whether police or security or anybody else, at any time that we were interviewing witnesses. And I don't believe that witnesses that we saw were in fact influenced by the presence of anybody in the vicinity. I mean, I can speak with confidence on behalf of all 4 members of the mission that if we had been aware of any inappropriate presence of Hamas police while we were investigating witnesses, we would have found that quite objectionable, and we would have taken immediate steps to do something about it and to address that situation. So I can, with every confidence, give you the assurance that allegation that allegation is without any foundation, in fact, at all.
Sorry, can I just come back? Our reporters in Gaza did note that there was Hamas in the vicinity of your interviews, and that it would have been possible for them to identify the people who gave testimony. Are you saying that's simply not true?
Oh, no. Look, obviously, I'm not saying that. I've got little doubt that Hamas officials had the ability to know who we were seeing. I think that happens in any similar situation. For certainly my experience in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. I think it's one of the facts of life in relation to this sort of investigation. But they were nowhere in the vicinity where they could have in any way overheard or exercised any direct influence on any of the witnesses we saw. And let me add this, that the strong impression we all had, and it's something we've discussed, is that we were impressed with the openness with which people spoke to us. People who whether or not they supported Hamas, and some clearly didn't support Hamas, and some of them who were openly critical of Hamas are referred to in our report. So whether people in the Hamas Authority were aware of who we were speaking to or not is something I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Shabtai Gold with the German press agency. Just 2 questions. Ideally, where would you like to see where would you like to see this process going from here in? And without the report sort of lists several options. Where would you like to see it, in your own view, as the clearest and best path? And secondly, if you can just sort of respond, there were a lot of personal attacks made against you at various levels, and I was just wondering how do you feel that that's influenced the team at all, or in any way, whether it's influenced you personally?
Well, as to where the report should go, and I'll invite other members of the mission to comment. Certainly, I would like to see transparent, open investigations into the allegations made in the report, into the findings made in the report, both in Israel and in Gaza. As I indicated earlier today, the report, the mission was in no way a judicial or even a quasi-judicial investigation. It was an informal investigation. We reached conclusions on the basis of information that we got on the spot from victims, eyewitnesses, and from what we saw with our own eyes in Gaza. Similarly, we made findings on the basis of damage and trauma caused by rockets and mortar fire in southern Israel, on the basis of what we were told by some of the witnesses that we interviewed. Some of them gave public testimony in Geneva, And from many reports that we got from non-governmental organizations and government reports of damage and the effects of rockets and mortars in southern Israel. So these allegations need to be tested. You know, if I can draw an analogy, when I arrived in The Hague as effectively the first chief prosecutor of the Yugoslavia Tribunal, I was presented with volumes of evidence collected in a similar way by a commission of experts that had been set up by the Security Council. It wasn't evidence on which one could prove war crimes. It was a useful roadmap for us as to where we should go to investigate. And that's the purpose to which I would hope our report is put by serious investigators, having a look at the facts that we've referred to. They need to be appropriately and deeply investigated by experienced investigators, and to the extent that there's evidence of serious violations of international law, they should be put into the hands of prosecutors, both in Israel and in Gaza. So that's where I'd like to see the report being used in respect of accountability. There are other recommendations in the report which I would suggest are important. Certainly one that the General Assembly should urgently convene a discussion on the legality and the future of munitions such as white phosphorus and flechettes and heavy metal, not only in respect of the human suffering that they can cause if they're inappropriately used, but also the environmental damage of which there is evidence that we suggest should be investigated and monitored, not only on the Gaza Strip but also southern Israel. So there are a number of investigations at various levels that certainly, speaking for myself, I'd like to see it go further, and I'd invite my colleagues to add. I'm sure we've all got our own wish list, and then if they wish to deal with that, I'll deal. I haven't forgotten the second question about personal attacks.
I think one thing we were all very encouraged by this morning was how many of the delegations called the report a serious report, a professional report. And I think it's that sort of seriousness and professional basis that we would like to be seen taken forward in a number of different fora. Very obviously, and I guess was said this morning, particularly by my colleague, Ms. Gilani, as part of the peace process, not to see it as an obstruction to the peace process, but as a block upon which negotiations within the peace process that focus upon the needs of people within the region could be used. And secondly, that the report should and can be used both by and to support of civil society organisations within the region and elsewhere. So I think I'd add those two.
Well, in addition to what my colleagues have just said, I would think that our purpose also was not just to deal with the situation of Gaza and the violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law that have occurred there, but to make this report in some ways a first instance where now the era of the application of international law starts. And I think it's very important that precedents are set where situations occur, and these precedents are taken forward in order to make sure that human rights and international humanitarian law are expounded to the fullest extent possible. And we would like the Human Rights Council to ensure that this basis is used in order to evaluate the conduct of countries, even in its universal periodic review. And I do believe that this whole issue and the importance that is being given to justice and accountability, it only becomes meaningful to the lives of so many people in the world when international justice is seen to have produced results and some alleviation of the sufferings of the people who suffer as a consequence of gross human rights violations and non-compliance with international humanitarian law. These should not just be words now in the text of laws and legal explanations of the law itself. These were made for the people. These were meant to make a difference to the lives and sufferings of the people, the kind that we have seen in Gaza. And therefore, I would really urge the United Nations bodies, not just the Human Rights Council, but all the other bodies that have a relevant mandate, to make sure that it becomes a living force and a living element in the lives of people that we deal with every day of our lives as human rights defenders.
Well, I would just like to add, because the remarks I've just heard have brought to my mind I would suggest the main value of accountability in this sort of situation of serious violations of human rights it serves a very important purpose of avoiding collective guilt. I think it's important. I think that there, as I said to the Human Rights Council this morning, in my opening remarks, there are many, many people in Israel and many, many people in Gaza who deplore the violence to which both sides have been put, and for which they're responsible. And certainly, I think we've all received and we've all read an outpouring of both not only criticism but also of support for the report from within the region, from within the occupied Palestinian territories and in Israel. And it's certainly our report has caused a huge debate, and I would suggest that's a positive result. And that debate, no doubt, will continue. To turn to your second question about personal attacks, obviously nobody enjoys being attacked, and a lot of the attacks have been in temperate terms. Not so much in the media, but in private emails and messages, and that's unpleasant. But let me immediately say that it hasn't. I can speak on behalf of all of us. It hasn't affected our work. We've gone ahead and did what we felt we had undertaken to do, and what our mandate required us to do. And the fact that we were attacked, I don't think, came as a surprise to any of us. The vehemence of some of it may have surprised me, speaking for myself, but if one does this sort of work, one's going to be attacked. It's not the first time, and probably not the last.
Yes, I'm Jan Herbermann. I write for Tagesspiegel in Berlin and other media. I have two questions. How do you assess the chance that the Israelis come up with an investigation? Is there a realistic chance? And secondly, do you think that the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip has the necessary legal infrastructure, i.e. institutions, prosecutors, etc., to start a thorough investigation? Thank you.
Well, as far as the first question, I hate setting myself up as a prophet. I don't have a crystal ball, and what the chances of investigations are really is difficult to say. I'm not all that optimistic, having regard to the response so far from the government of Israel. There hasn't been any clear response, as far as I'm aware, from the authorities in Gaza. But it depends a lot, I think, on the approach of the international community. It's all a matter of politics at this stage. Decisions have to be made by politicians. Justice, whether it's domestic justice or international justice, is all about politics. As far as the facilities for having efficient investigations in Gaza, to the best of my knowledge, the courts function. They're judges. People are convicted and put in prison. So there is a justice system we met with representatives of the Palestinian Bar. Unfortunately, they've had to be split because of the reality of the split between Gaza and the West Bank. But there's a very active bar in the occupied Palestinian territories, both in Gaza, and an independent bar. And I know that from my own involvement with the International Bar Association, of which they are members, and very active members. So if there's a political will, I've no doubt that both in respect of Israel and in respect of Gaza, if the will is there, independent, efficient investigations could be held. And if there's a shortage of human resources, there'll be no end of assistance that could be given by the international community, by individual governments to assist in conducting those investigations.
Alaji Gorgindo, Walfadjri Senegal and ContinentPremier.com. Two questions, sir. You were giving 6 months to both parties to show their honesty before you refer to the ICC. My question is, are you optimistic? And don't you think that, regarding that, least developing countries are asking for equal justice for everybody, that a failure for the United Nations to clarify this situation would have a negative impact worldwide? Thank you very much.
Well, you know, I think I've answered the first part of the question already, as far as whether one should be optimistic or pessimistic on holding investigations. But certainly, if I understand the second part of your question correctly, I agree. I think it would be a setback for international justice and accountability if the United Nations does nothing to bring justice and accountability to the victims of war crimes committed by both sides.
Possible that you've answered part of my question, but it was, in fact, what would be your reaction if this report, like, to be honest, so many that go to the Human Rights Council, is greeted with a great fanfare and then disappears?
Well, obviously, we would all be disappointed if that happens, but nothing can take away from the record of what is contained in that report. I think that's important. I think that the people in the region have that as a document which is going to be there regardless of follow-up. But I'm optimistic that there will be some consequences. I think the response from the ambassadors representing their countries at the Human Rights Council this morning was encouraging. They all, with only one exception in the case of Israel, they all took it seriously. And that seems to me to be important, and I hope that will be reflected in the resolution that will come out of the Human Rights Council, I understand, at the end of the week.
Yes, good afternoon. John Zarakostas. Firstly, sir, on behalf of the Press Association here in Geneva, I'd like to complain at the way you launched your report in New York. We got a few hours advance notice and the transmission was appalling, and that created a lot of confusion for the members here. We hope that won't be repeated in the future. And now my question is, with reference to the expert of the panel on the weapons systems, I was wondering what led you to conclude that you had no evidence that dime was used. Were you provided with any evidence of dime weapons by any expert body or any forensic evidence from medical practitioners on this weapon system? Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. As far as the complaint is concerned, I'm sure the relevant people in the room will take note of it. This is not something that I think you can lay at the door of the mission. Save to the extent that the report was completed literally within a few hours prior to the launch in New York. And if you had reason to complain, the parties, the national parties and the authorities in Gaza had even greater reason to complain because they got no longer a prior notice than you did. To the extent that the mission's responsible, you have our apology, but it was unavoidable. And clearly, if it had been within our power to give the media more notice of a very long report, that would have been our wish. So it certainly wasn't. It was done. It was done knowing what the problems were, and what the media had to go through as a result of it. It certainly wasn't done thoughtlessly or in any way disrespectful of the very crucial job that the media has to do, and I don't think anybody needs to be convinced of that more than I do. As far as the dams are concerned, I'm going to defer to my military colleague, Colonel Travers.
Have we got ignition? Can you hear me okay? We've made reference primarily to the presence of heavy metals, as shrapnel and possibly in granular form, that may have been used and discharged by missiles. I think our factual information is that we discovered tungsten shrapnel in at least 2 incidences, and that tungsten shrapnel would produce the same post-impact hazards to victims as dime in granular form. So we felt we could reasonably associate dime with our concerns, because tungsten, one expert informed us, at least one expert, perhaps 2, informed us that tungsten as a metal is highly carcinogenic. So we could associate dime with our concerns about heavy metal anyhow. I have to be honest and say we found no evidence of dime, but we did get at least 2 expert references to either the presence of dime or to the hazards associated with dime if it should be found amongst victims. And we are particularly concerned about mentioning this because there are victims who have survived who may still have this time bomb in them. And we have one victim, at least, from an impact that occurred at a mosque, who has a piece of tungsten shrapnel in his spine, which cannot be removed. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is potential time bomb. So we were very concerned about the comments by a medical practitioner. We felt that while it wasn't proven, it was sufficiently of concern to us to put people on alert about this product, this item. Thank you.
If you compare your report with other UN documents on the issue of impact of Hamas missiles, human rights violations impact, I think it's the most comprehensive one so far. I went to the archives. But it's still being criticized that you neglected this part of the story and that you did not take in certain oral witnesses that have been given here in Geneva. My question is, am I correct in assuming that if the Israeli government would have fully cooperated, if you would have been allowed to go into the cities and villages that had been affected and do on-the-spot investigations, this part of the report would have been even more comprehensive, and you might have been able to corroborate some oral witnesses you have heard here. And secondly, not only all international human rights organizations like Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, but also all relevant and government-independent Israeli and Palestinian human rights organizations have welcomed your report and are endorsing the recommendations. Do you see any role for those human rights organizations to play in the further process?
Well, thank you for both questions. I've got no doubt that our report would have been more comprehensive had we been allowed to travel as a mission to southern Israel and visited the schools and hospitals and interviewed more of the victims. I think the detail would have been greater. It was difficult doing it from a distance, obviously. And it wasn't the best way of doing it by telephone conversations between Geneva and relevant witnesses in Israel. In addition, it could have made a difference, I've no doubt, had the Israel government accepted my earnest, repeated requests for us to meet with relevant Israeli officials to discuss our mission, to discuss our mandate, to discuss the issues which were of concern to them. It really it seems to me to be unfair to blame us for any lack of detail in the face of that lack of cooperation. So what additional information we could have got, I don't know, because we don't know what they didn't tell us. But I think, having regard to the fact that that there was an absence of cooperation, we really, in the limited time we had available to us, I think went pretty far in trying to give a full account and in trying ourselves to understand the detail of the effect of the firing of thousands of rockets and mortars into southern Israel. And here I think the report speaks for itself, and I don't think it's relevant or appropriate to start counting pages or counting chapters. The attacks by the Israel Defense Force over a number of weeks was a very complex one. It took a lot of investigation, and we had to be selective, as I mentioned at the Human Rights Council this morning. We couldn't investigate all of the instances that called for investigation. We had to choose a relatively small number because of time constraints and the resources available to us. It was a very complex investigation. The firing of rockets into southern Israel is and I'm not making any comparison of numbers or effects or trauma, is a much less complex investigation. But I think I can say that the investigation there was done certainly to the best of our ability. As far as the role of human rights organizations are concerned, I don't think one can overemphasize the importance. Human rights organizations are affecting the political decisions that are made and have been for many years. I was convinced at the time, and I remain convinced, that without the huge push from international and domestic human rights organizations, there wouldn't have been an international criminal tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. It was the joint efforts of human rights organizations and the media really working together, because the one certain human rights organizations wouldn't be able to accomplish very much at all if they didn't have media support. So it's an important element, and I think it's becoming more important, the role that these organizations are playing in the political arena.
I just want to add something to the first question that you asked. I must emphasize here that we made every attempt and every effort possible to make sure that victims on both sides are heard. Despite the difficulties, we did this not because we were trying to draw any kind of superficial balance. That was not our task and not any part of our mandate to do. And we don't think that there is a possibility also of drawing that kind of balance, because there are different actors with different powers, different responsibilities under international law. However, what we did was to make sure that we did look at the international law, we looked at the different actors involved, and applied the responsibility that the law places on the different actors. But our main concern here was to ensure that Israel's lack of cooperation does not leave Israeli victims without a voice. And we therefore, whatever we heard in the public hearings is mentioned in the report. We have given credence to their stories. We have because of the fact that we couldn't go into, couldn't get much details, we have not been able to give the details, but we have tried our best to portray their plight from the stories that we have heard. And I think that's the important thing for us, that any government's decision not to allow these voices or not to facilitate our access to these voices should not affect their right to be heard.
Thank you, sir. Just a clarification, because the position of Israel, it seems clear to me, but did you receive any positive sign on behalf of Palestinian authorities to begin with these transparent investigations?
As I understand it, the attitude of the Palestinian Authority is to accept our report and its recommendations. I think that was made, I think, it's been made very clear in public statements.
Mr. Goldstone, what if you know, before, what if there is a lot of Israel exercising a lot of pressure on the Palestinian government, so they won't take the people who did commit crime in Gaza to international tribunal. And there is one story now running on the streets in Ramallah and Gaza that the Palestinian government, they owe the Israeli $300 million for a phone system or something like that. And if the Palestinians go for tribunal, it means they have to pay these $300 million, which the victims now, they are worried about the reaction of their own government, that they will draw this complaint, international complaint, because of a sum of money. What do you feel if that will happen really? How do you feel, you and your member of the community? Thank you.
Well, you know, I don't know any of the facts to which you refer. I would only hope that all governments, all members of the international community will act morally and for the concern of victims, and not simply ignore the calls of victims because of what are purely political or economic concerns. Obviously, if for any reason pressure is brought on governments that will cause them to ignore the interests and the hopes, the legitimate expectations of victims, is something that I think the members of our mission would deplore.
Comment, please. Can I hear another comment from your member, the committee member? Would they feel okay with this?
Totally agree with Professor Goldstone.
And I think there seems to be agreement with what I said. I think we can go to the next question.
Frédéric Colère for the newspaper Le Temps in Geneva. The U.S. ambassador in its statement says that the report fails to deal adequately with the asymmetrical nature of this conflict. And it says as well that while national militaries are bound by humanitarian law, terrorists ignore these laws. And I'd like to have your comment on this appreciation of the U.S. ambassador.
Paragraph is
it's
that?
on its page,
on what page
3.
is it?
The U.S. statement, page 3.
Over here.
The report fails to deal adequately with the asymmetrical nature of this conflict. It's the basic idea is that you have national armies respecting the humanitarian law, and then you have terrorist group on the other side. Can you comment on this?
Well, thank you for pointing that out and for your question. But in fact, it's not factually correct. We have dealt with the asymmetrical nature of the conflict in our report, and very much in the terms that my colleague Ms. Jolani referred to a few minutes ago. We did talk about this asymmetry and the effects that arise from it. So what's behind this criticism? Again, it's difficult to know, and I don't want to guess. But it's something I hope that the United States government will be more forthcoming about. And the question, I think, should be addressed to them rather than to us.
May I add, I think that the report is very clear on it, and we have gone to a great deal of trouble to consider international law, to pick out the provisions of the law in order to show that non-state actors are not immune from accountability of human rights and humanitarian law violations. There is a vast body of international law now that is now accepted to be including non-state actors. And we have not only drawn attention to that, we have also, I think, given the Human Rights Council and the international community some basis on which to take the discussion forward. And I think that's the important point here. So there is no truth in the fact that we were not considering the nature of the conflict and the asymmetrical nature of the conflict, if that is what it is called. We are very concerned about the accountability of states as well as of non-state actors who are guilty of international crimes or of gross violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law.
I mean, I think what's important too, if I may add to that, that the approach of the mission in some areas, I think, has pointed out areas of humanitarian law that need to be developed. I mean, the whole idea of humanitarian law is to protect. The one example, perhaps the one example, and I don't want to get into technicalities, was the issue of prisoner of war status that we dealt with in relation to the abduction of the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. Clearly, we accept, the mission accepted unequivocally, and it's obvious that Hamas is a non-state actor, and the traditional approach is that prisoner of war status only applies where somebody is captured by a state actor, by a high contracting party to the Geneva Conventions. What's a new area is an abduction in a situation of occupation, which is an international armed conflict by definition in the Geneva Convention. So you've got a sort of grey area here, and our approach is that the law should be extended, should be interpreted expansively to give more protection, not less protection, and particularly in these new areas.
I would also like to add that look at the situation of the international law now. With regard to state responsibility, it's absolutely clear. Now, if there is any hesitation to apply accountability and justice to state parties in whose respect the law is very clear, then how much further can we go in the case of non-state actors? So I think it's very important that international community on the whole and the United Nations bodies concerned with international accountability and justice make sure that accountability for violations of international law is held absolute. No state should ever have an idea that they can commit violations of the nature that we have witnessed in Gaza and get away with it. At the same time, dealing with state parties and then expounding the law with regard to non-state actors has a very significant message in itself. And that is why this report is of so much crucial importance. And this is the message that we as members of this mission are trying to give to the international community. Don't get into semantics. Don't get into political posturing. This is a serious issue. This is an issue of the protection of people. This is an issue of the protection of people's lives, their liberties, their livelihoods. And this is, therefore, the most important and the central role of bodies like the United Nations to perform.
Kuwait News Agency, my question is to the military expert. Bear with me for my lack of knowledge of military affairs and medical substance. But when you speak about these shrapnels as time bombs. What do you mean exactly? Do you mean that they can explode in the... What do you mean exactly, please?
Sorry about that. I should have elaborated a little bit. Tungsten in any form, if it's used as a propellant in an explosive or as a shrapnel, the consequence of an explosive, if it enters the system, has been proven to cause cancerous lesions or cancer in survivors who might otherwise survive the injury from the tungsten. It doesn't explode. Tungsten is used in munitions because it's resistant to the temperatures of the exploding material. It's very, very useful. And I have to be honest and say tungsten is used also to localize an explosion and confine it to a specific target area. It could be argued that those who developed tungsten in explosives were doing so to minimize collateral damage. But the effects as a result of our observations in the Gaza conflict is now to produce another hazard, which is survivors may have problems with cancers developing in their bodies post-treatment, post-operation. I hope that clarifies that matter for you.
Simon Bradley, Swiss Info. I just wondered if you could say a couple of words on the position of the European Union, which was rather unclear. It was a series of questions. They said there was a serious report. What's your position on that?
Well, I must say that I welcome the serious questions that the European Union asked. I think it indicated to me that they too were taking the report seriously and realized that it raises serious questions. I don't believe that I can read more into it than that. But certainly, if there was criticism of the report, that certainly didn't emerge, and I think I interpreted that too as being positive.
I think if you look at the questions that were put by the Swedish delegate on behalf of the EU, you would understand that these are pertinent questions. For instance, they spoke about how do further investigations take place. And our response was build on our findings, take them further, and create a body of evidence that is sufficient to prosecute. The next question was, there was an apprehension expressed, will it impact negatively on a peace process? And our response to that is, on the contrary, it will help a peace process, so that the initiatives, peace initiatives, are well-founded on a realistic view of what the situation is on the ground. Where these kind of violations are happening, you have to have a peace process that ultimately ends in a sustainable peace. If you leave gaps and you ignore and avoid addressing violations, peace will not be sustainable. And that is, I think, also an essence of this report.
We're running short of time, so we'll take one and perhaps one more question after that. You had a question.
My question is to the weapons expert. Basically, when you talk of asymmetry in terms of use of weapons and the kind of tungsten, heavy metals, which have been used very heavily in this particular conflict, do you have any assessment in terms of do the weapons used by the so-called the non-state actors, do they match up to in any way come in terms of this so-called asymmetry? Would you make any assessment on it?
In some respects, the asymmetrical warfare is very, very interesting, and there are challenges in the future because I suspect the arguments for asymmetrical warfare are creeping legal arguments for justifying the relaxation of the laws of war. And the reason for that is the growing instance of urban theatres of war because the world's populations are increasingly living in urban areas. I think this is a very, very dangerous maneuver. I think this is an attempt to play with the laws, and I think it's an attempt to compromise and maneuver the laws by legal military practitioners, and we should be on alert. That's my view. On the other side, the use by insurgents of highly imprecise, indiscriminate improvised weapons is equally to be condemned because they are so indiscriminate. And it's very obvious to us from listening to the testimony of so many people from southern Israel that even the alert systems in southern Israel put in place to save people's lives actually create the distresses that so many of them we saw suffer from, the constant alarms. My family personally experienced this in Israel in 1980 under attacks from Katyushkas from Lebanon, so I have definite connection with this. So I can identify with the Israeli dilemma in southern Israel and say equally indiscriminate firing of weapons is to be condemned, just as precision firing of weapons indiscriminately is to be condemned as well. And that's asymmetric warfare as far as I'm concerned.
Frank, we have a couple of minutes. If you could keep it very brief, please. Thanks.
Just very quickly about a piece of news coming out of London today that relatives of Palestinians in Gaza have sought an arrest warrant for Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak, who's due to travel to Britain. And they're basing this partly on your report, on evidence in your report that higher-ups were responsible for giving orders that led to possible violations of the law of war. Do you think that your report justifies being used in this way, and do you approve of this?
You know, it's really not appropriate for us to comment on that, because we didn't, as part of our mission's mandate, go into any individual responsibility for any of the war crimes that we've identified in the report. So that would be a matter for the sort of investigation which we've called for. I mean, if the British authorities have information we don't have, that's another matter.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have run out of time. There are copies of the statement and the press release at the back of the room. Thank you.
Very good.
Sorry? I got out of that one.
Yeah, no, I think you're very well.
Yeah,
Were you pleased with it?
Pardon?
Were you pleased?